Welcome to People and Profit. The global economy is facing its biggest crisis in 90 years. The International Monetary Fund says the pandemic and lockdown measures will cause the worst recession since the Great Depression. So what does that look like, and what hopes are there for a recovery? Well, to help us explain this, I'm joined by Ludovic Subran, who's the chief economist of the insurers Allianz and Euler Hermes. Ludovic, thank you very much for joining us. The world has changed dramatically since the 1930s. So when we talk about the worst recession since the Great Depression, what does that look like in 2020?
Well, it looks like $9 trillion lost in total, which is the GDP of Japan and Germany combined. So it's quite a massive shock. Actually, at the trough of the crisis, which is in the second quarter of 2020, we may be in the tune of -20 to -30% in most of the world. So when you have half of the world in lockdown and suddenly more than 3/4 of the GDP of the world in lockdown, this is what a major depression looks like. It's called the Great Lockdown Recession. It's very different from 2008, 2009 because it didn't originate in the financial sector. It originated in the real economy. It's about jobs. It's about bankruptcies. And maybe the one solace that we see, the one silver lining, is that policymakers have been very prompt and very strong in reacting, which may actually mitigate somehow the shock and help us recover faster. But the severity and the magnitude of this shock is quite unprecedented, at least for our generation.
With those steps being taken by policymakers, though, and the fact that we're in this deep freeze period, does that mean that, it will be quite a long time before we see the full extent of just how big a shock this is to the economy?
Actually, yes. For example, some of the effects of this recession when it comes to jobs, we estimate that most unemployment rates around the world are going to triple. Or when you look at insolvencies, so small business bankruptcies, we estimate that they may increase by as much as 20 or 30%, depending on the country. These numbers will actually only arrive, the negative news flow will only arrive in June, July, August, because the first phase of the recession, everything has been put on stop. Economics has been in quarantine, the big freeze, as you called it. And so we didn't really see what it means when it comes to companies functioning or people having been supported, for example, with short-term employment schemes. So we don't really see the extent because of the pause button, both from the lockdown, but also from what policymakers have been doing. And we may see, for the next 2 to 3 quarters, the magnitude of the shock unfold before our eyes.
Recessions are often given a letter. A V recession is a sharp drop and then a recovery. A U-shaped recession is a more prolonged slump, but growth eventually returns. And then there's the L shape, where growth doesn't recover to where it was before. Can we tell what sort of shape this recession will be, and what does that mean for a recovery?
It's a difficult exercise, right, because of this radical uncertainty. What I can tell you is that financial markets have been expecting a V-shaped recession, which is a very sharp slowdown, a very sharp rebound. I don't believe in that personally because of all these sectors that won't be able to rebound as fast as we would like them to, especially transport, retail, consumer-led sectors where people would not necessarily immediately go and buy a car, right? So I don't think we're going to have this sharp rebound. The L-shaped recovery, so the other extreme, whereby we don't really go back to pre-crisis level, I don't believe into it too much because I think policymakers have been strong to avoid any type of infection from this disease into the financial sector, and have been putting a lot of money on the table to make sure that from safety net to springboard, that most of the businesses and the people will be able to go back to consumption. So we are in this middle scenario, which is called the U-shape, which is a very sharp contraction of more than 30% in the second quarter of 2020, then 2 to 3 quarters of growth in the muddle through mode. So not really a lot of growth, but still some growth as we exit lockdowns. And then we expect a full rebound when we actually find a vaccine in the middle of 2021. So it means you go back to pre-crisis level by the middle of 2021, which is almost 18 months of a crisis, but which is much less than the past financial crisis, which was almost 5 years for some countries to go back to pre-crisis level, especially in the Eurozone, because of the relapse of the sovereign debt crisis.
Just very briefly, in a year's time, what do you see the picture being for the global economy?
Well, I think, it will be like a very long weekend and we go back to work on a Monday with a bit of a hangover. So I'm very concerned that we may maybe paint the picture too bleak, because I believe that we have enough engines of growth to restart. But the problem is, for example, how do we restart when it comes to the state interventionism in some of the sectors, like air transport or like automotive, or like whether we want to have a different world when it comes to greening a little bit, or not wasting this crisis to go back to crisis type of vicious circles. So my personal and very maybe optimistic picture of the world after this crisis is we go back to where we were, so we don't completely lose growth and wealth as much as we see right now. So we have a rebound, but we use that as a lesson to basically put a little bit more our money where our mouth is when it comes to climate change fight, when it comes to fighting inequalities, but also when it comes to not being too naive about international relations and how they interact with the economic relationship between countries. But we should really avoid to try to be too protectionist, for example, or to try to temper too much with what we think is the good way out of the crisis.
OK, Ludovic Subran, Chief Economist at Allianz, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to you for watching at home. You can get in touch with your questions on the economic impact of the pandemic. You'll find us on social media. Until next time, thanks for watching.